All right, everybody, I am so thankful that you are here as we continue actually beginning to hear Jesus' words, how he tells us about himself. So first thing, we're going to go over that shorter part. We tried to memorize the whole thing. We're going to say this together. These are Jesus' words. Say it with me. I am the resurrection and the life. That is a bold claim. Jesus better have something to back it up, right? He better have something in his back pocket to prove that he is the resurrection and the life, and we will get to that today. But before you get to the resurrection and the life, got to have the hard conversation. Got to talk about death. Got to talk about something we don't like to talk about, because in your life, you are taught how to optimize your life. You're taught life hacks. You're taught how to continually be more and more productive, how to live a better life. We avoid talking about death. I believe as a 31-year-old, and if you're any younger than me, it's easy to have a denial of death about yourself. I want to share this image, the idea of keeping death at arm's length. Deny it. Pretend it's not there. Well, I'm pretty good at denying it. I'm pretty good at keeping death far and away from me until I met a friend. He was a 72-year-old Liberian pastor in the inner city of Newark, New Jersey. And he told his congregation that he was headed back to Liberia to help start a school for 3 years. So this pastor who had served about 32 years in Newark, New Jersey, was flying back to Liberia. He said he was going to start a school, but 3 years later would return back to Newark, New Jersey. I took him aside after he told his congregation this, and I said, "Are you really planning on coming back?" And he said, No, Pastor Nathan, I'm not coming back. See, if I go back to Liberia, I will die in a field surrounded by friends and family in my church community. If I stay here in America, I'll be placed in a nursing home and die alone. I have to think he was on to something there. The denial of death, that we in America can keep death at arm's length. There's a funeral home down in South County that I remember going in, and as you go in, there's 6 different rooms that can be used at any given time. All 6 can be used for kind of viewings before funerals happen. And as you go in, you see in each room there's kind of a different response to death. When I was in the room that I was meant to be in, it's you step into the room, you kind of say hello to a couple people, but as you get closer to the body up front, it's a little bit quieter, right? It's a little bit quieter because you're not sure what to do, and so you like cross yourself and try to fit in, and you try to just kind of not say anything offensive, but also condolences to the family, but then you step away from the casket, and then you have the fun conversations at the back of the room, right? In some sense, I don't think we're ready to let death get closer than arm's length. In the process of grieving, I think we do need to keep death away. Maybe we aren't able to face it alone. Maybe we try to avoid it altogether. Well, there was, like I said, 6 different rooms in this funeral home, and there was another one. I was standing outside. This was 2014. I was talking to Jeff, our senior pastor. He had visited our family. And what happened is there was a man who came rolling into the front door of the funeral home with a red cooler on 4 wheels, and it had a Cardinals emblem on the side, and then there was like a TV that was bungee corded to the top of the cooler, and he's rolling it in, and he heads into the room. He opens the cooler after he moves the TV, and everyone cracks open a drink. You turn the TV on, and well, they couldn't miss the Cardinals game. And so with a dead body in the room, they're celebrating. I know people grieve differently, but I couldn't help but think that this was another way that we can keep death at arm's length. Well, if you think that death was just that moment where life ends, death is also described in our lives as change and decay. It's the little ways that death shows up. Does anyone wake up in the morning and they're like, I knew that sprained ankle in college was going to come back to haunt me? The ankle's just a little bit sore, and now I have to like warm up my body just to move and get out of bed? That's death. It's change and decay. Or maybe you look into the mirror and you realize for just a moment that that's what people look at every day when they see me. There's wrinkles that show up. There's kind of like weird barnacles that show up on your body that you're not sure you really want them there. Or maybe it's that you are of an age where most of your friends are entering that time where their lives are ending, and you go to funerals every week and you just kind of say, I can't do it again. I'm so tired of going to funerals. It's change and decay. It's the end of a relationship. It's the loss of a dream. It's expectations that are left unmet. No, death actually is way worse than maybe we ever considered. And so maybe what we need to do is keep it at arm's length. Well, what does Jesus do? What does Jesus do with death? What does Jesus do when he shows up at a funeral? It's a little bit of what we actually saw in our story today. I want to share 3 things that we see Jesus do in our story today when he encounters death. So the first thing he does as he encounters death is it seems that he waits. It's a mystery. I don't know why he waits, but he does it. It says that he heard his friend Lazarus, who had died, or actually was sick, and his friends are saying, Jesus, can you come and actually be with your friend? Rush to the deathbed of your friend. You need to be there for him. And even later we'll see that Jesus, you can heal him, right? You've done this thing where you heal the blind and the lame and you forgive sins. You can do something about this. But for some reason, Jesus waits. He doesn't go to the bedside of his friend Lazarus, and instead he says this, that it is for the glory of God that Lazarus would die, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. And in this waiting, what we see is a bigger purpose of how Jesus deals with death. He is not a paramedic who puts a Band-Aid on the problem. He is not a doctor who just fixes a little bit of illness. No, he actually waits for death to happen so that he can demonstrate his power. Because see, there is no resurrection without death. There is no empty tomb without a cross. And so when Jesus sees death, he moves from arm's length and it comes near to him. He waits, but then he acts, he recreates, he brings new life. For Jesus, death does not stay at arm's length. He does something else then, and it's something that, I'm a 31-year-old man, and when I show up at a funeral, I'm kind of expected to keep it together, right? Some people, they do the sobbing, grieving, but for me, well, as a pastor especially, I'm supposed to keep a straight face, right? I'm supposed to be the guy who brings the words and says the things. And so maybe for you, you encounter death and you can just stuff it down. You can kind of disassociate, pretend that it's not happening. You can kind of just keep death at arm's length. And yet here's what we see in Jesus Christ as he encounters death. It says very simply in verse 35 of our story, Jesus wept. Jesus did not leave death at arm's length. It says that he let death come to him. He felt it deeply. It was a friend he loved. How could he not weep? The champion of the world, the one who would one day conquer all death, yet still feels the pain of death. Jesus refuses to leave death at arm's length. He does something else about death. He faces it. He faces it head on, and the crowds around him are a little bit concerned. See, finally, at some point, Jesus decides to go to the tomb where Lazarus had died, had been buried. His body had been prepared, placed in a tomb, and he gets there, and he tells them, I want you to move the stone. I want you to open up the grave. And this is the part of death that's actually really alarming, that in that cave, in that tomb, is a smell. It's a decomposition. It's a scary thought. You know, you think of how we think of cemeteries in America, and maybe it's a nice place for a morning walk, but most often it's arm's length. It's a little bit of a haunted place in our minds. But no, Jesus faces death. He convinces them to finally open up the tomb, and then he calls into his friend Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus comes back to life. Lazarus walks out bound by the bandages of his burial that he was prepared to die in, and yet he's unbound and released and lives again. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. You know, the funny thing about Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, and I have to think about this a little bit, is that Lazarus had to die again. Ever think about that? Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, but then died again. And so this power that Jesus shows, and he does it in a prayer to his Father, says that, Father, give me the power to raise from the dead so they might know something bigger about me. He says, so that they may believe in me. He raises Lazarus from the dead to point to a greater resurrection, where Jesus himself would actually not keep death at arm's length, but that Jesus would enter death. That he would suffer the worst that humanity has to offer. That he would endure, become a victim, take on the worst parts of our lives and humanity, and actually die himself, so that you would know in your death that you are not abandoned. He does not put death at arm's length, but he comes to you. And he promises you a resurrection, because Jesus' death was deathless. There was no death in Jesus, and Jesus actually lives to this day. He has a body. He reigns as a king over all things. He's the king of all creation, so that one day he will raise you to new life. Because Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. I am a fairly lazy Christian apologist. There's this idea of being an apologist is the idea of defending your faith or having an answer for different things of your faith. And I'd like to confess to you that I'm a lazy apologist. I'm not good about arguing my faith. Most often my friends want to have conversations about culture and different things that Christians believe. And sometimes when I just don't want to have that conversation, I tell them, just so you know, I believe that there was a man who died and is alive again. So that's where I'm coming from. And to be honest, it might not be the best kind of attitude, but it shuts down the conversation really quick. But in saying those words, what you need to know is that this resurrection of Jesus Christ, that he lives, was once dead but now alive, is the basis of everything we believe. It matters for us. Everything stems from this resurrection of Jesus, and it's why our faith is not just a pipe dream. It's why our faith isn't futile, and it's why we're not just a cult. Because Jesus was dead and is now alive again. So you know our friend, Pastor Jeff, he's been here the last 2 weeks, but he's the senior pastor over the Enterprise. He'll get mad at me saying Enterprise, but that's okay. But he came back from his sabbatical and he hung out with some monks, and he starts to drop all these kind of like really wise things that make him look good, and he reminds me like, no, this isn't me. I like picked it up from someone who was way smarter than me. But he tells me about the time that he spent time in a Benedictine monastery, and they have a rule of life. And one of those rules of life is this: keep death daily before your eyes. Keep death daily before your eyes. Because Jesus did not keep death at arm's length, but Jesus became a human and came among us. Keep death daily before your eyes. He says that he was walking through a cemetery, and there was a man who was taking care of some of the grass there, and there was an empty hole next to another grave, and he said, "Oh, who died?" And the monk who was taking care of the cemetery said, "Oh no, this hole is for the next one." Keep death daily before your eyes. But it's not just some morbid tale at this monastery. They aren't just waiting around to die. Jeff continues to tell the story that the gravestones, the head on every grave, actually would say these words: "Here will rise. Here will rise Matthew. Here will rise Thomas. Here will rise John." And that's a promise for you too. Here will rise Terry. Here will rise Megan. Here will rise Jane. It's a promise for you in Jesus Christ. Your pastors know that you live in a world that still endures death. Every morning you will continue to look in the mirror and the wrinkles will increase. Death will be a sort of unwelcome companion alongside of us. So what should we do as those who have Jesus who has gone into death? Well, I'm glad you're here, because Thursday afternoon I had to help Jeff with what he told me was an object lesson for his sermon. He's at Christ Memorial down in South County, and he asked me if I could help him move something for him. And so what we did is we went into a storage room at this much larger kind of church down at Christ Memorial, and he said, "We're getting that down," and he pointed up there on a top shelf, and up there was a Dracula-like looking casket. It was a coffin. And he said, I'm using that this Sunday. And he told me his plan was to put this casket on a cart from the maintenance room, and he was going to roll it out at the beginning of the sermon and then explain that we're going to talk about death today. I told him that I hoped that old women shrieked and that children cried when he rolled the casket out, but I'm not sure how it went. I'll ask him how it goes. But it's that casket, that coffin, that's a reminder, and it gives us an opportunity. When you see death in the world, I want you to say something to it. Can we go to the next slide? You know, we said, "I am the resurrection and the life," but let's be honest, you are not Jesus, right? And so let's say these words together. Jesus, you are the resurrection and the life. When you wake up in the morning and your elbow creaks a little bit more than you wish it would, Jesus, you are the resurrection and the life. When death confronts you as you look in the mirror in the morning, Jesus, you are the resurrection and the life. When sickness racks our bodies, when we visit friends in the hospital, Jesus, you are the resurrection and the life. And even when we visit funerals, even when we are among those who have died and gone ahead in Jesus Christ, say this with me: Jesus, you are the resurrection and the life. Let those words sink into your being. We have a Jesus who would not keep death at arm's length. He has gone into death and has come out alive. Say it this week: Jesus, you are the resurrection and the life. Amen.